Listen, I think one thing is clear with Elon and Vivek. They want to cut some of the spending out of the government. And so when I think of, we have a $6.75 trillion budget. When you look at Medicare, Social Security, and interest payments, that's 57%. And if you throw defense on top of it, you're like at 75%. And so you only have 25% to work with, unless you're going to attack those sacred spaces, right? Medicare, Social Security have always been third rails. The easiest thing is to pressure the Fed to cut rates, right? Every 25 basis points of rate cuts saves $25 billion from your budget. Now think about how many $100,000 employees you need to cut out of the government to save $25 billion. Like, quickly do a calculator and do the math, right? And so the biggest fix for the government would be to get short rates down, so our funding costs. And I think the story they're going to tell is we're going to need monetary policy because we're going to be really good on fiscal. We're going to cut. Now, if that's the case, it's great for the stock market. It's great for America. The proof will be in the pudding. Can they cut, right?
But Mike,
we know Trump wants to cut taxes to spur growth, but can he cut spending? And he never has in his career.
Well, to that end, too, would you be a buyer of long bonds at this juncture, or would you actually go short with that kind of doubt?
I think you've got to sell the long end. Every rally you want to sell. Listen, because if the things are working, the Fed's going to cut rates. Right. Again, this idea of how do you cut interest rate costs down, and the yield curve steepens. And so I just don't think there's a whole lot of value in a world. And listen, Bitcoin is telling you that. Gold, silver tells you that. Like, the world is still worried. The only way you get out of $36 trillion of debt is to inflate it away. And you want to gracefully inflate it away. You can't have hyperinflation or you have chaos, right? You want to run 4% inflation. That's hard to do. But that's the goal.
Right. So, Mike, it sounds like you're a bond bear, but you're a Bitcoin bull. And I want to get back to crypto here. And I want to talk about the possibility of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. You think about this rally that we're seeing in Bitcoin, which is one of the purest supply and demand markets. And one of the reasons I keep hearing is that there's a lot of optimism that we could see the United States government buy up to $1 million worth of Bitcoin. Now that you do have all these crypto advocates in Congress, are you confident that we could see something like that?
I still think it's a low probability, right? You know how Congress works. The House gets excited, or the executive gets excited, and the Senate says, calm down, right? That's the role of the Senate. And while the Republicans control the Senate, they don't have 60 seats. They don't have close to 60. And so, listen, I think it would be very smart for the United States to take the Bitcoin they have and maybe add some to it and say, we want to show the world that we're going to be a technology first country, a crypto digital asset first country. I don't necessarily think the dollar needs anything to back it up. We have the strongest military in the world. We have the dominant economy in the world, and the reserve currency we've earned. And to need to back up the reserve currency is counterintuitive. And so, again, listen, if we get the Bitcoin reserve, and as a guy that owns a lot of Bitcoin, I will not cry. And if you see me crying, there'll be crocodile tears. I think Bitcoin heads to 500,000. Again, it's a whole different paradigm because it forces every other country in. Countries are already buying it. I've got a dear friend, the guy that actually turned me on to Bitcoin in 2013, who's in the Mideast right now. And he said he's never seen anything like it. He's convincing more people to buy Bitcoin in the 3 days he's been there than any time in his whole career. And they're huge pools of capital. And so we're seeing something globally. When Trump advocated in Nashville that he was going to be a crypto president, a Bitcoin president, and now he's the president, let me tell you, other leaders heard that. And so I think we're strapping in for what could be an amazing rally.
I want to get back to your point on, hyperinflation, Mike, or at least more than 4%. I look at a longer term chart of Bitcoin, say 5 years. And in that run up, post or during COVID, I always see an inflation indicator here. I know that there was a lot of helicopter money that helped out as well as people being home with nothing to do. But to me, it was an indication that at least this community saw massive inflation coming, and that was borne out. Do you not see the most recent run-up as the same sort of signal?
Yeah, listen, so when the government's printing as much money as I mean, the Bitcoin narrative, the only narrative really for Bitcoin is it's a hard asset in a world where you're going to debase fiat currencies. Like, that's the story. Forget any other story. Like, you know, when Bitcoin, they say, oh, we're going to be level 2s and we're going to do NFTs on it. I always think that just confuses the story.
My eyes glaze over. Yeah.
The story is digital gold. It is a hard asset that's believed to be a hard asset by the people that participate in its community. And it's really hard in a world of populism, not just in the United States, all over the world, for governments to not want to spend more. And every single government is spending more than they take in.
But Mike, isn't that run up to 500,000? I mean, if it happens in the short term, without a strategic Bitcoin reserve, it's going to mean 6, 7, 8, 9%
Listen,
inflation.
Let me be really clear. I don't want it to happen in the short term unless there's a Bitcoin strategic reserve, because that's a different story. Then it's just a scramble. It's a crazy scramble to get the hot commodity. If it would happen naturally, it means we're starting to have hyperinflation, and then we start to lose civil society. Like, in every country that you look at that experiences hyperinflation, the results are really crappy.
Mike, how soon do you get to 500,000? That's kind of a stunning level to think about, but you know, we're probably going to hit $100,000 this year if we keep on going at this rate.
Yeah. So listen, the total market cap of gold, I think, is like 16 trillion, right? And so that's 800,000 Bitcoin. So when does Bitcoin become gold? Like, there's a new generation that cares more about Bitcoin than they care about gold. I'm turning 60 next week, and so I still own a bunch of gold. I'm an old guy, but let me tell you, no 40-year-olds on gold, no 30-year-olds on gold. And so as we see this generational shift, like, Bitcoin should match gold within 5 or 10 years. And that gets you to 800,000. That's with current gold prices. I think gold's going higher.
I always hear, you know, Tom Keene.
Yeah.
Every time he mentions Bitcoin, he's making fun of it. Literally every time for the past decade. Exactly. And I always wonder if, you know, did tribal elders in prehistoric times also make fun of their kids for bringing gold into the tent?
Every month and a half, he has me on surveillance radio and just beats me up about Bitcoin, which is painful. Mike, turning it back to you. First of all, happy early birthday. That's exciting. I do want to talk about Galaxy's approach specifically to the ETF market when it comes to partnerships. I cover ETFs. I've watched you partner with Invesco, with State Street on different spot ETFs, but also these crypto equity ETFs. What is your thinking around partnerships? Why not just launch ETFs solely as Galaxy?
Listen, we're an institutional firm. We don't have giant retail sales forces, and those ETFs really end up being sold into the high net worth channels, right? And so we don't have an army of registered investment advisors. And so we partner to rent those armies, quite frankly. We think we've got knowledge and IP of this space and real understanding of it, and our partners, you know, partner with us because of that. I think this State Street partnership is off to a great start. That they're just starting to market these equity funds, but the returns are spectacular. I mean, you could have had a better start date. And so usually when, you know, an ETF has great returns, it draws in capital. So we'll see.
Hey, Mike, you know, I want to talk about the macro before we let you go a little bit more, because we were talking about Bitcoin and the run-up. We talked about gold a little bit. The dollar in particular has had just a stunning run-up. It's still up even more today. People are thinking that the dollar will really become much stronger under a significant tariff policy under Trump. But if you believe that the dollar doesn't have as much value in the future, I mean, how do you think about this trade?
Listen, you know, there's that expression, the tallest pygmy. Like, again, you look up north, you know, I bought dollar Canada in the last few days. You know, the U.S. economy is winning relative to Canada, relative to Europe, relative to China. And so I think the dollar is going to be strong, certainly through the end of the year and maybe further. with this Trump victory. You know, normally you go with the breaks after an election, and the markets are telling you the dollar is going to be strong. And quite frankly, our economy is strong, right? We have a very strong economy. I think one of the things that was kind of crazy is Biden and Harris, they never really articulated how strong the economy was, right? 65% of America thinks we're in a recession. We're absolutely not in a recession. We've got a booming economy with a booming stock market, with more job creation than in any 4 years in history almost. And so what's happening, which is real, was 70% of Americans didn't like the direction the economy is going. The gap between rich and poor still is creating such division in this country.
Absolutely.
It's creating that polarization. And a lot of people still feel left behind.